Welcome to another Sister Saga episode. In this episode, we're talking about how to avoid building fortresses and why isolation is dangerous. So, Angeliki, should we go through the judgment?
Yes.
The world is dangerous and enemies are everywhere. Everyone has to protect themselves. A fortress seems the safest, but isolation exposes you to more dangers that it protects you from. It cuts you off from valuable information. It makes you conspicuous and an easy target. Better to circulate among people, find allies, mingle. You are shielded from your enemies by the crowd. Angeliki, who is Xin Shi Huangti?
He's the first emperor of China. He's described as a fearless warrior. He is the one who joined the different provinces and actually created China. And also he created the Wall of China as well. However, at some point he decided to make a law and he banned all the writings of Confucius. However, all the citizens loved Confucius and they were actually reading him. This created outrage. So at the last stages of his reign, he was completely isolated. He wasn't seen outside the palace. And suddenly, he died. We really don't know how. The fact is that the citizens didn't know about his death because he was so isolated.
So, Angeliki, who did this better than the Emperor of China?
So we go now to France. There is a civil war between the king and the nobles. The nobles are losing. So the new king is Louis XIV. He knows that all the aristocrats of France are resenting him a lot. So he decides to build the new palace in Versailles for a specific purpose, because from there he can actually see exactly what the aristocrats are doing and he can be actually informed for any conspiracies against him. So he was very clever, actually.
So the plan of the palace was to have all the nobles and the aristocracy living with the king, so that the king can be aware of, what they're discussing, who are allies with whom, and
he could keep an eye on everything and everyone.
Exactly. The other learning that we get is again from psychology and how humans work. And humans are really social creatures. So this means we need people around us, we need people to communicate with. So when we're not having that, we feel isolated and start feeling paranoid and start making up stories probably. And what did you hear recently?
Yes, I was actually listening to a podcast, and the podcast said that the people who are very social active and they go out and they have many friends, they live at least 20 years more than people who are very isolated. So it's very interesting, isn't it?
Yes. And also think of ourselves during COVID, where we're working remotely. We didn't have the human interaction, how depressed people were, how difficult it was to make friends and allies in a workplace environment, for example. So don't isolate yourself. Make sure you go out there and you make allies and you expand your network in different circles, because that would be really key to power. So, Angeliki, what about Talleyrand? We've been discussing about him a lot, and he's an excellent figure. What about him in terms of his network and how he stayed close to people?
So even though he was coming from an aristocratic family in France, when he was in power, he always going around and working in the cities of Paris, talking and seeing all the different parts of society. So he knows exactly what they say, any conspiracies, and he's always around people from different parts of society, which was very interesting for me.
Yes, which takes us nicely to the leaders in different companies, right? So if you are not close to the people you are managing and leading, then you don't know what they're thinking, you don't understand their troubles, their challenges. And since you don't get them, they feel they have not connection to you, they don't trust you, they don't share. So you create this barrier, this connection. So another interesting point was the fact that if you get isolated, you lose control of proportion. What does this mean, or how I understand it, is that if you are alone in your own space and environment, you create a world around you that you think it's important thing. You may come up with random irrelevant threats that they don't really exist in the real world, but it's because you have created this own space of isolation, you see bigger problems that actually exist in the real world. So you lose completely the big picture.
And going back to the historical example, you become paranoid because of that, right?
Yes. And also you lose the social touch. Again, after COVID, it was so much difficult for us to be more sociable, open up, talk, have these random chats with people. It was really difficult to get this sociable conversation going. Really interesting.
Yes, especially I remember on the tube when it was packed after COVID, you just didn't want even to look at each other. You were looking at the floor. You didn't want to have a connection with any other person. It's very interesting.
Yeah. So the key to power is, if you really want to grow as a leader or get more power, you have to go and mingle with people. You have to go and create different networks from different diverse networks, right? Different backgrounds. Expand your network in many different ways. So when actually is a good idea to isolate a bit?
I think when you're overwhelmed, it's very good at some point to take a step back, isolate yourself, because this time will give you the opportunity to have another perspective of things. However, as we talked about it, sometimes when you are isolated for a long time, it's very difficult for you to break out from this isolation and then go actually out to the real world. So isolate yourself, but for a short period of time.
Yeah, like use it as a tool when you really cannot take it anymore. You want some space to breathe.
And you need to refocus as well to reset your goals.
Yeah.
Take a step back, isolate yourself, but be mindful that you shouldn't be isolated yourself for a long period of time.